Greetings, hello, this is the Click podcast from the BBC for Tuesday the 9th of January 2018. It's Gareth Mitchell here with Kate Arkless-Gray, technology journalist, space expert, raconteur, genius. Have I missed anything out there, Kate?
Lego builder.
Lego, of course. I always forget the Lego builder bit. Okay, and Lego builder, Kate Arkless-Gray is here. Now, one person, Kate, will be very glad that you're back on our podcast is Neil Carmichael, a mate of mine. He's also on our listeners group on Facebook, because the last time you were here, Neil immediately took to Facebook to say, how good was Kate Arkless-Gray on this week's show? Aww. So a bit of fan mail there from Neil. I thought you'd like that.
That's a lot to live up to.
With. Not bad, is it? Yeah. So, yeah, and maybe Neil likes his Lego building too, and he'll be even pleaseder to have you. And also, Kate, I thought it might be fun to talk to you and our listeners about tech New Year's resolutions, if we can still say that on the 9th of January. It's not too late to talk about.
I'm still keeping my resolutions up, so it's
well,
not too
that's
late.
Good to know. So it could be, backing up our files or looking at our cybersecurity again, installing the latest firewalls and security software or whatever. So how about you? Have you made any tech New Year's resolutions that you've not broken?
Well, I've just made one now that you've said backing up files, because yes, that's definitely something I really do need to do. I think one of my resolutions, it's not exactly a tech thing, but I want to get more active and more fit. And I know what I'm like. I'm quite competitive with myself, so I'm thinking about getting, one of these bracelets that will track your steps and your heart rate and things like that.
Yeah.
And also, you can get ones that buzz if you've been sitting down too long. So if I'm sitting at my computer and it says you've been sitting down for too long, and it buzz.
Oh, that's pretty good. Mind you, you need to change it so it kicks in. It would need 26 and a half minutes before it kicks in, because if you're ever on this programme and you're sitting here talking to me for 26 and a half minutes,
that's true,
we'll get a bit of a buzz.
I had one previously that you clipped to your clothing, and it was to make you sit up straight, and you had to sit up straight and set it, and then after like 2 seconds of you slouching, it would buzz. Which was fine until I was in important meetings and sort of leaning over the desk to show somebody a graph, and then I'd suddenly be like, woo! And they had no idea what was going on, and it was a bit complicated to explain.
It just takes a lot to explain, okay. Yeah, but a good tech New Year's resolution. One of mine is going to be to improve my accessibility on social media, like on Twitter. And I got this because an Afghanistan veteran, injured in Afghanistan veteran Rob Long, who I don't know, but he tweeted over the New Year period that he wanted people to change their accessibility settings on Twitter, because Rob Long is blind, and he says it's really easy just to go into your settings so that if you post a photo on Twitter, then blind users will get the voiceover of the text relating to that photo, the description. And it's really easy to do. So I've actually changed my Twitter settings. So, and I think there are similar settings on other social media, but on Twitter, you just go to settings and privacy, and then you scroll down to accessibility, and then you can switch on compose image descriptions. And so, it just means every time you put a photo up, you put a caption on it, and it doesn't affect your character count, but it does mean that if a blind user is scrolling through your timeline and the photo comes up, instead of just getting a generic image thing, it's actually a spoken description of what everyone else can see.
It's really important to do that on websites as well. I've been doing that in the last year, is making sure I put good, I think they call them meta tags or alt tags on images.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a resolution that obviously applies to people who put up websites and so on, and people like me, and I don't manage a website, and I might have thought, well, what can I really do about accessibility? Well, we all can, just in our settings, as Rob was asking us to do. So there we are, some tech New Year's resolutions. If you have any, dear listener, then do let us know, just on Twitter, as you know, I'm into that, @GarethM, or hashtag #BBC Click Radio, or you can type in BBC Digital Planet into Facebook, and then pass our entrance exam, and then become part of our community, and let us know what you think. Okay, right, let's have the programme. That's another resolution of mine, to waffle on a bit less. So here's the show, and then we'll do some more outro after this. Greetings, hello, and welcome to Click. This is Gareth Mitchell with technology, and we're going to be talking about the protests in Iran, a guard dog app from Ed Snowden, better 3D vision for driverless cars, and a possible flotation for Spotify. And we're going to have comment this week from tech journalist Kate Arkless-Gray. Hello, Kate, and Happy New Year, because I haven't seen you since last year. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Happy New Year to you.
Marvellous. OK, now first to Iran, where, of course, recent days and weeks have seen anti-government protests. The country is one of the world's most stringent in censoring the internet, and for some years there have been reports that the state is actually working on the so-called halal net, which is effectively a countrywide intranet that would kind of fence off Iran's networks from the outside world. So how much has the grip tightened as a result of the most recent unrest? Let's hear more now from Masa Alimadani, who works for the Freedom of Expression NGO Article 19. So first of all, Masa, what do we know about the current state of the protest? Because we should say that you're talking to us from Canada, aren't you? But what do you know about what's actually going on in Iran at the moment?
The fever pitch was really the few days before New Year's Eve and the couple of days afterwards. I know it's dissipated a little bit now. What a lot of focus is on is mainly people crowding around different prisons, like Evin prison, the families of the protesters who've been arrested. There's been numerous numbers, and so there's a lot of attention on that, and some sort of demonstrations outside of Evin prison, although there are some scattered reports throughout the country still, although it seems to have definitely lessened.
And how has the state responded in terms of censorship? I'm assuming it's tightened its already fairly tight grip on the networks.
Yeah, I mean, you really correctly reference the colloquial term for the national internet network, HalalNet, and it's something that has been long worked on, and sort of the different aspects of it kind of were a little bit revealed during the few days that unrest really peaked, because a lot of people, especially through mobile operators, because I think the Iranian government was worried about, mobile communications. People were reporting that they couldn't access foreign traffic, but they could only access, local websites. And this is part of the National Internet Project. And so some of those reports kind of reveal that there were outages at some points. I think it was on January 1st and December 31st. And of course, the headline news was when Telegram was censored on December 31st, and Instagram for a period of time, although it was reopened. And so the censoring of Telegram was a big
So some of these apps and instant messaging services have been closed down. Many people will be familiar with Instagram, maybe less so Telegram, but it's a hugely popular app in Iran, isn't it? Something like half the population are using Telegram or have been using it, haven't they?
Yeah. I mean, internet penetration in the country of 80 million is hovering around 45 million, and there's supposed to be just about the same number of people using Telegram inside of Iran.
Right, so Telegram has become very popular, partly because it's been a way around the censorship. But the Telegram instant messaging app and service, that has been criticised itself, hasn't it? Because the Iranians were quite successful in closing some of its kind of news, public news feeds down. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean, there was one channel that has, publicly declared itself to be in opposition to the Iranian government. It was called Ahmad News, and the Iranian government was trying to get it shut down for quite some time. They've been accused of fake news, and they have a really bad reputation inside of Iran. And I mean, I don't personally endorse anything the channel says, because sometimes the stuff can be often actually misinformation, but the government wanted to be shut down because they were spreading information about protests and encouraging people to throw Molotov cocktails and things like that. So they asked Telegram to shut it down, and Telegram responded by actually shutting it down.
Yeah, and it got criticised for that and defended itself by saying, well, the channel was calling on its subscribers to use violence, to use Molotov cocktails. So they're saying, we basically weren't going to have a channel on our service that was encouraging people to do illegal and violent things. And many people say, well, fair enough. If you have a fake news channel allegedly inciting people to violence, there is a case for shutting it down under any regime, whether it's in Iran or not. But nonetheless, there has been a lot of criticism of Telegram alongside that. Is that fair criticism, or do you think that's just part of operating in Iran?
I mean, there's been a lot of speculation about why it was that a company like Telegram got away with staying open. I mean, for that criticism to be fair or not is not certain, but there was definitely a problem in transparency in the government. I mean, in the platform, Telegram itself, kind of documenting how it was processing these requests. Because when different digital advocates pressed Telegram to show the terms of service that they were abiding by, it was really hard to come by any actual documentation. And other technology companies do have transparency reports for these kinds of government requests.
Okay, now Kate Harkless-Gray, you've been following events, certainly through the social media and so on. What do you make of it?
Well, actually, I was wondering if I could ask how different this is to when there have been previous unrest, because I think, as you were saying, the internet penetration in Iran has grown so much that shutting down some of these services appears to have affected more like everyday life, people who are running small businesses, for example, on Instagram, whereas previously it would have been particularly targeting people that were using them maybe to arrange protests. I sort of wonder what you thought about that.
Is the censorship broader brush this time round?
Yeah, I mean, I'm following this one Twitter account called Telegrampreneurs, which is kind of advocating for all the businesses that are being lost because Telegram has been censored. And this was something Rouhani, who's a moderate president, who seemingly in his word seems to be, on the side of protesters and rights inside of Iran, pointed this out and said it was out of his hands that, other authorities were shutting these things down and actually taking away jobs. And he said that one of the reasons why he wanted to make sure Instagram was reopened was so that these businesses could get back up and running.
Right, okay, we need to leave it. Just very quickly, do you happen to know, is Telegram back up again now in Iran?
Actually, I did. I was messaging with a friend a few minutes ago, and he confirmed it is not a backup. It is still down.
Okay, yeah, because there have been different reports about that. Thanks for clarifying that. For now, we're going to have to leave it there. That's Masa Ali Madani. Appreciate you joining us. Well, now, how about this? The idea of a kind of guard dog that you can take around with you, like a digital guard dog. Let me tell you a bit more about this. It's a new app. It's a service. One of those behind it is Ed Snowden, working with Guardian projects and also a range of free speech campaigners. And it's called Haven, this app, and it's pretty much about protecting your physical cybersecurity as well as the digital kind. For instance, like how you might protect yourself from somebody breaking into a hotel room to steal memory sticks or maybe to hack your laptop. Well, Jack Megan has been finding out more.
Have you ever had to leave something important behind, but wanted to keep it safe? Get Haven.
Just before Christmas, I was scrolling around on Twitter and I saw an article that caught my eye. It was about a new app called Haven being launched by the Freedom of the Press Foundation and the Guardian Project, described as a personal security system. Sufficiently intrigued, I clicked through and saw the former US intelligence officer Edward Snowden, the current Freedom of the Press Foundation board president, was leading the project. So what is Haven and how does it work? Nathan Frades is the director of the Guardian Project and open source collaborative firm Mobile Security.
Haven is a free open source app for Android phones that turn a phone into a personal security device. It really lets you leave a device behind, a second device, which will then be activated to monitor any changes in the room or the space environment, motion, sound, vibration, and then notify you of those changes. So it does this in a way that's totally secure, completely private, and doesn't, expose you to any third-party surveillance. It just allows you to monitor a space when you leave that space and to keep watch over anything in it.
So Haven uses the inbuilt capabilities of a second smartphone to detect when intruders have entered the specific monitored space. The app then sends an encrypted message to the user's primary phone using secure technologies like Signal or Tor. But why has Haven been created? Frades and his collaborators believe Haven can be a useful tool for people at risk.
So we think about the journalist traveling in a part of the world where there's risk of someone, physically invading their space while they're there or not there. We think about the Human Rights Office monitoring an election or trying to document the aftermath of genocide or issues of violence and documenting, working with local groups, and how those offices can often be raided or vandalized or have theft. And we also think about really ourselves, myself and the other developers who work on things like Tor and Signal, who work at Freedom of the Press Foundation on things like Secure Drop. We carry a lot of sensitive information in our computers. There's a lot of these ideas that seem niche or extreme, but many of us encounter them in our daily lives and in our travels, and that's at the core of who we wanted to try to help with Haven.
It's certainly a great idea, but how realistic is it? Angus Marshall, lecturer in cybersecurity at the University of York, says there are flaws in the software.
It's dependent on the sensors on the mobile phone itself, so it can be quite dependent on how good the hardware is, and that may mean that it misses activity, or it could mean that it's actually oversensitive and it's giving a lot of false alarms, so it's claiming to detect things but they're not significant. More importantly though, it depends on having connections available to wireless networks, either the mobile phone network or to a Wi-Fi connection to the internet. Now, if you are investigating an organisation that has significant resources, so it could be a state-sponsored agency, it could be some sort of major corporate organisation, they have the potential to actually block those connections fairly easily. And of course, if the connection is blocked or drops, then the alarm just won't get out.
The Haven app was only released in late December as a public beta. Nathan Fradius says they are welcome to all constructive analysis of the app.
To propose this idea that you can take a second-hand phone, an old phone, and you can turn it into something useful that can protect your space physically. And this is kind of our theory. And we put the theory out, we put the code out, and we invite others to collaborate with us to test this theory, to improve it, to fix the code, to think of new uses. So we're really excited to have criticism, we're really excited to have feedback, because that is what we call threat modeling, right? It makes it better.
This technology is still very much in the development stage, and the possibilities go beyond the original idea. For example, there are groups that use the technology to monitor durian tree fruit, and there are others that use it to monitor illegal logging and poaching. So if there is one thing about Haven that Nathan Fradius from the Guardian Project wants you to take away, what would it be?
We hope that not only will we actually impact directly through Haven, but we hope that we can show that you can build very usable, friendly, empowering technology using sensors, but you can do it in a way that doesn't disempower people and reduce their rights and force them to turn over data. So it's always that double impact that we work on at the Guardian Project.
That report from Jack Megan, and Kate Arkless-Gray was listening to that, and there you go. It is kind of makes an Android phone into a kind of digital guard dog. What do you make of that?
I just wonder how many people, I worry about the number of people who would actually need to use this, because the number of people who are now bringing more and more devices, smart devices into their home, that means that they would be spied on, versus the number of people that are so worried about their physical security that would have to use it. It's quite a different way of looking at things. People are bringing in these Alexa and the Google Home speakers that potentially could be listening in on everything. Yeah. So it's a totally different.
It almost seems like
side
a retrograde
of
step, possibly, to think about your physical cybersecurity in that way.
Yeah, I mean, my dad actually once bought me a kind of all-in-one padlock, flashlight, and kind of rape alarm thing once that could also detect movement for when I was travelling, which at first seemed like a strange Christmas gift, and then I thought was quite sweet, really, because he was thinking of my security.
Yes.
But I wasn't sure if he was just being a bit paranoid. But I guess for some people, it is something that they need to worry about.
Yeah, indeed, as we were hearing there, and indeed the problem potentially that it could trigger some false positives and false alarms and so on. Okay, lots to talk about, but not enough time, Kate. We're going to move on. This is Click from the BBC in London. I'm Gareth Mitchell. So looking forward to the next generation of driverless cars. Well, they'll need to be good at looking forward, literally. And indeed, as they look forward, they will need to exceed our own human ability to gauge distances and depth. Now, depth sensing comes quite naturally to us, but it is a massive challenge for machines, especially to do it really quickly using minimal processing power. MIT researchers in the United States reckon now that they're a step closer to depth detection for cars by using a camera that effectively slows light down. And they think they've improved on present systems by 1,000-fold. I heard more just now from Achyuta Kadambi, who's a PhD student at MIT.
The goal of this technology, it's in the vein of something called time-of-flight imaging. The idea is almost like sonar. It's like a sonar for light, but it's much harder when you deal with light as opposed to sound. And this is because light travels really, really fast. Let me illustrate the time of flight with a concrete example. Imagine I'm on one side of my office, and I take a laser pointer and shine it to the far wall. And looking at my office surroundings here, the far wall is about 10 feet away. And so in 10 feet, the light has traveled 10 nanoseconds. That's the time it takes a photon to travel 10 feet. And 10 nanoseconds is a really short period of time. It's 10 billionths of a second. And so the challenge here has been and continues to be how to build devices, photonic devices, that can measure these really small time delays of light. The standard approach, of course, is to build faster and faster imaging sensors. This new work aims to essentially virtually slow down the light using a principle called heterodyning, which is similar to how your car radio works. And by slowing down the light, we can extract very high-speed information with low-speed sensors that are available today off the shelf and on market.
And that gives you the best of both worlds, doesn't it? Because if you're using sonar, like the imaging that ships use, of course, these waves are they're difficult to focus. They travel very slowly. Using light waves, they're very fast, and they're quite skittish, to use a not very technical term. But using this, you call it heterodyning, but you have a technique anyway for getting the best of both worlds, enjoying the speed of the light, but also making it as manageable and simple to process as something more traditional like sonar.
One of the reasons that sonar and these technologies and even radar are great is because, the challenge has been you're dealing with really long wavelengths. And so things are a little bit easier to sense. And that's why we saw so much excellent development in the early 20th century. But now we're moving towards a future where we can start to do things with visible light. And visible light is really the key. There's a reason that biologically our eyes are sensitive to visible light, because there's massive amounts of information there that are just not possible to sense with other types of radiation signals.
Right, and so to the driverless cars of the future, that's one use case for this technology. And what you're saying is that you can use this technique to potentially create depth perception from optical sensors that perhaps wasn't possible before. Tell us what kind of difference that would make as we try to move into a field, into a realm of autonomous vehicles.
Autonomous vehicles are the futures. My personal belief is that we won't get the AI to be strong enough to be, far superior than a human in all situations. But we can certainly build machine sensors that exceed our human senses, and that's our goal here. So in contrast to previous approaches, this new approach is able to obtain very high quality positioning of objects that surround a robot. So if I have a robot, it can tell me exactly where objects are placed in the scene, and of course, it can smartly avoid them. That's the goal. There is critical importance to understanding the depth, because without depth, you don't know exactly how far away objects are. You just see them. And so I can have a small object that is nearby and a large object that is far away, and you'll perceive them similarly from a single camera viewpoint. But if you use a depth camera, you can estimate the size and position of the objects and navigate and avoid them in the real world. So at MIT, we're partnering with a number of automotive manufacturers. We're in early stage discussions to see how we can start to deploy this new form of LiDAR in the next generation of autonomous cars.
That's Achyuta Kadambi. So Kate Artless-Gray, I thought that was really interesting, especially one point that came out of that Achyuta is not particularly keen on the AI approaches. He's saying rather than just have lots of training data and get cars very good at recognising let's just make good detectors in the first place, so we don't need to rely so much on strong AI.
Well, it is very, very hard to make something to detect that sort of depth like we can as humans. And one of the bottlenecks they're having for these algorithms is they just don't have the right data sets that they could feed in order to make the machines learn what it is they need to know and how to differentiate between 2D and 3D images.
Yeah, so it's an argument for moving away from AI and more into this kind of depth perception. But this is nonetheless, it's LiDAR, it's using light. Great possibilities, but limitations in that approach as well, I'd have thought.
Yeah, well, there seem to be a few different approaches to doing depth perception. But one of the concerns that I had with this time of flight method was that because it's using light, if it was in a very, very bright place, for example, Death Valley, with all the sunshine there, could that affect the accuracy and potentially cause accidents if the data that was coming back wasn't quite accurate enough?
Yeah, so they're going to have to use different modalities.
I imagine.
Obviously, yeah, especially when safety is such a obvious concern. Kate, thank you for that. Well, finally, I think we should have some tech predictions, specifically in music and streaming. We had a big special edition all about music and technology at the end of last year. So let's jump into 2018 on a similar theme and hear more from Ashin Luni. He follows these things very closely. He's a composer, DJ, music editor at the lifestyle magazine Phoenix, and chief evangelist at the mobile messaging tech company Open Market. Wow, that's with a CV like that, Ashin, you are totally the person to speak to here. First, let's do the bit. Everyone is talking about Spotify and this flotation it's been, kind of trailed for some time. Is this year finally 2018 going to be when Spotify goes public?
I believe so, yeah. There's so much noise about it. It's a really exciting time for Spotify. It's a really exciting time for the digital music industry. I think Spotify is really the culmination of all of this development that we've had over the past 10 years since Spotify was founded. We've obviously had the iTunes Music Store, and then their kind of general shift to streaming, Spotify in particular. And what's interesting about Spotify is that it's so far ahead of the competition. Today, Spotify has around 70 million paying subscribers, people who are paying for music every month, and a total listenership of 140 million because they have that excellent freemium model. Now, the nearest competitors are Apple Music, of course, which has garnered 30 million paying subscribers in a very short space of time. They launched in 2015, and Amazon with 16 million. So I think the writing is on the wall. It's very exciting writing. I think Spotify is an incredible application. It's been an absolute game changer for the world of music. And I think 2018 is going to be the year where a lot of the early investors get a chance to cash out, if you like. And a lot of the record labels do very well because they make so much revenue from Spotify at the moment.
But it's losing money, isn't it? So investors are surely going to be worried about that. There's been all kinds of legal cases. So it's not entirely... And also a lot of sort of rows over the rather poor royalties that it pays artists. So that it's not an entirely rosy picture for Spotify, is it?
Indeed. Yeah, no, totally agreed. Well, Wixon Music Company that represents folks like Neil Young and Tom Petty are suing Spotify for at least 1.6 billion because they say they are incorrectly processing the mechanical royalties. When a piece of music is streamed online, there's a publishing royalty, which is the notes and melody and the lyrics, the actual song, and then there's the mechanical royalties, which is for the mechanical quote-unquote reproduction of the song by playing it again in a different format. So I think there's a saying in the music industry, where there's a hit, there's a writ, and this is no exception. Spotify is hugely successful, although it is, obviously it's not in terms of profit, that's a different discussion, but it's sort of not the time for Spotify as a growth business to be looked at in terms of profit. It's to be looked at in terms of the future of the music industry, and I think that's, despite the disadvantages, that's what's exciting.
Okay. Well, what about the future of SoundCloud though? Because that's had a terrible year, hasn't it, in 2017?
Indeed. Well, SoundCloud is there's some interesting comparisons there with Mixcloud, which is a platform I use and I'm very fond of, which is a kind of close-ish competitor. SoundCloud has really evolved into a platform that will stream individual tracks by DJs and particularly producers in the electronic music field. Mixcloud publishes compilations, so they're quote-unquote mixtapes, which are uploaded and shared digitally. And one of the things that always impressed me about Mixcloud and their CEO Nikhil Shah is that they ask for permission rather than forgiveness, where I think some of the other platforms have asked for forgiveness and then permission later, which I think was the situation with SoundCloud. I think one of the things that's interesting about SoundCloud, they had the partnership with Universal Music, and what this means is that there's frequently, good for generating revenue, but these adverts that take up 30 to 40 seconds before you can listen to a piece of music. And in my capacity as music editor of Phoenix, if I'm sent a link on SoundCloud, my first thing that I'll do is copy and paste it into Spotify, just to if it's there, because I pay for Spotify, I can just skip the advert. So it's a really valuable platform. I really like SoundCloud. They've been real innovators in terms of the user interface, and they've been great supporters of electronic music. But there's something that's not quite gelling in terms of the user experience.
I think a lot of people feel that way. I think there's a real genuinely warm feeling towards SoundCloud amongst many music fans and podcast and audio fans like me. What about you, Kate Artless-Gray? What's on your radar, tech music-wise, in 2018?
Well, I'm actually quite interested in the evolution of Spotify. If it does go public, will they have to expand their business, or they just stick to streaming? Will they do more in the sort of podcast realm? I mean, I read somewhere that they actually wanted to be the third biggest advert seller after Google and YouTube. So it might not be too long before you still have a few adverts even in your paid stream.
Yeah. What do you think, Ashim? What will the strategy be there? Because they will want to raise revenue, won't they?
Yeah, indeed. Well, I asked a number of friends of mine who work, they were Spotify users, they work in technology, they work in advertising, they work in business, or they are musicians. Now, all of the folks I asked who are users like myself and paying subscribers, they absolutely love Spotify. It's got this beautiful Swedish UX design. It's faultless. The folks I know who work in tech, a bit like, as Kate mentioned, it's quite an exciting time. They could diversify into things like, blockchain for tracking royalties, etc. They could absolutely own a lot of the podcast market. They have some brilliant podcasts already. The folks I know in business were very intrigued that it's actually not an IPO, an initial public offering. It's a direct listing, which means that the early investors can cash out very quickly. And in terms of the advertisers, they're a bit frustrated because what Spotify gives them access to is the less valuable 70 million subscribers who don't actually pay for music. They're not the enthusiasts. But of course, if you pay for a subscription, it's advertising free. And then in terms of the musicians, like you mentioned, I think that kind of love-hate relationship is best summed up by a quote from Hunter S. Thompson.
Make it quick.
When he said, the music business is a cruel and shallow money trench, a long plastic hallway where thimps and pimps run free. Oh no, we're
out. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks for listening. But we're still here for some exciting Click podcast outro. And let's just see. Massa, are you still with us? We had you at the beginning of the programme talking about Iran. You haven't gone away, have you?
No, I'm still here.
Excellent. And Oisin, I hope you're still there, because we were literally just talking to you about music streaming.
Indeed.
Unless you literally thought, right, that's it, I'm out of here. So just whilst we have you, Oisin, one thing we didn't have a chance to talk about as we were looking ahead there to what's going to be going on in music tech and streaming in 2018 is, something that I read this, it was quite interesting about this whole net neutrality issue in the United States. So, this key concept about kind of equal access to the networks. And in other words, the central pillar of the internet, that as it stands at the moment, one organisation can't pay more money to be able to stream its services in higher bandwidth, for instance, than another organisation. So if you're a news organisation, you can't say, right, we're a big news organisation, we want a big fat kind of web channel that kind of gives us precedent over other content providers online. That's net neutrality, which of course is under threat in the United States, and quite a high chance, say some, that will be revoked and repealed in 2018. I was just wondering, Oisin, what that might mean for music streaming if we end up with fast lanes and slow lanes on the internet.
Yeah, I think it would be a terrible development for music services, particularly for startups. I mean, the whales of the music delivery and movie delivery world, Netflix, Spotify, etc. They potentially have the war chest to invest in faster delivery to the end users. This is a great money spinner for the networks that go to the home themselves, but it's one that really only the biggest companies will be able to afford. So what this will do, it'll really cramp competition, and it will really knock a lot of the more innovative startups out of the game, because they won't be able to pay that extra to get in the fast lane to be delivered to people's homes. I used to work for a content delivery network many moons ago, and there are various overheads in terms of storage and being able to service a big number of concurrent users, but there's always the assumption that the internet, the last mile that goes to somebody's house, is a kind of even playing field. So this makes it even more unfair. I think it's potentially a disaster for innovation in the digital field, and I really hope net neutrality is maintained somehow.
Yeah, it's certainly one that will keep such an important tech story for 2018. Yeah, Kate.
It's quite an interesting one, isn't it? Because obviously when you understand the idea of net neutrality, you think, well, okay, this is a very, very important thing. But in some countries where data, for example, on your mobile phone is very expensive, a lot of people will choose their tariff because you can get, free access to WhatsApp, because that won't be... that data won't be included in the price they're paying, or free access to streaming music. And for them, if they're not seeing the sort of global picture of net neutrality, the idea that they suddenly would lose that free access might seem not such a good thing.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it potentially could be contradictory. That's the thing. Yeah. And I just wonder, Massa, if you have a view on that, or if not, if I could find out a bit more about what you're doing in terms of your research, because we heard you there in the programme really giving us this kind of outline of censorship in Iran. But you're related to this, you're doing a PhD at the Oxford Internet Institute. So what's your PhD looking into specifically?
Well, the PhD I'm doing is looking at a project that kind of tries to track how social media affects political participation and social mobilization. And I'm zooming in on Iran and kind of looking at the development of one particular platform, which has come into the news with the protests in Iran, which is how Telegram is dealing with this.
Yeah, I mean, Telegram has been the big story, isn't it, as we've been discussing?
Yeah. But I started doing this research in my master's program looking at Telegram and its influence on the parliamentary elections in Iran in 2016. And it's kind of never surfaced again with the protest movement. So there's, different events that this platform has become kind of integral to.
So what is it about the platform specifically then? Just that it's, for some reason, the Iranian authorities have been more relaxed about people using it, or does it just make it easier for people to bypass censorship, or a bit of both?
Well, there was actually a study that came from a tech blog inside of Iran this morning, Techrasa, that was talking about how with Telegram's popularity, there's been less and less content going onto websites and more onto Telegram channels, just because that's where users are, that's where Iranian eyes are. So hosting your content on there just makes the most sense. You can get views into the millions if a post on one particular channel gets shared in different channels and different group chats. So the features on it are just really conducive to the environment in Iran. I mean, in terms of the speeds, in terms of censorship, in terms of everything, hosting content on the public channels is just a really easy way for information to flow inside of Iran.
And do we know, maybe this is part of your PhD, just how effective protest is through the social media? I mean, obviously we've had the physical protests, as it were, and kind of a certain amount of violence as well in the country over the last couple of weeks. But what difference the social media makes? In other words, is it about then, or largely to convene protests in the physical space, or is it also using the online space as an opportunity to, to persuade or cajole the authorities to change? I just wonder exactly what its role is.
Well, I mean, I know a lot of people have been asking questions and being like, is Telegram responsible for people being out onto the streets? And that's really hard for us to know because that data is really hard to come by. But it's definitely obvious that there's a whole spectrum of different voices and different agendas on Telegram. And if you've been kind of following the different discourses that Iranians have been following, you see that there's different political parties present. There's different agendas even from abroad. You have and so the two of the channels, one of them got censored, Ahmad News. It's been hugely popular and it's been kind of encouraging violence, and it's actually raised a number of questions in terms of who's behind it, who's funding it, and is this actually productive, the fact that Iranians are following this kind of strange discourse that's coming from this channel that's based in Paris.
Yeah. And that's what the Telegram closed down. That channel. It's a public channel. Yeah. Okay. Now, whilst we're talking, and whilst I have you, Massa, in the podcast intro, we were talking about tech New Year's resolutions. So we're all going into the new year with fine intentions of doing more backups and taking our cybersecurity more seriously. Are you doing anything in particular, or are you pretty sorted already? Given what you do, you've probably really thought through your cybersecurity. But do you have any tech resolutions for the new year?
Being sorted is not how I often describe myself. But, I definitely have, especially after the Iran protests broke out, because I've just been attached to all my screens and I'm a particularly bad addict. I have an Apple Watch, I have an iPhone, I have my computer, and I have a lot of screen time, and I'm just trying to take some breaks from my screens.
Right. Screen breaks would be good. How about you, Asheen? Have you got some music streaming New Year's resolutions? Or?
Absolutely. I've been kind of making mixtapes and sending them out to friends and family for quite a few years, and I have a list of about 12,000 folks who get an email every month from me.
And I listen to your Mixclouds; they're brilliant. You are my music discovery.
Thank you so much. That's lovely. Well, one of my resolutions is to do more Mixclouds. Absolutely, that's kind of spreading the joy of music. But I'm right with you in terms of the time out from social media. It is quite addictive, so I'm going to be having more timeouts where I switch off the notifications. I don't go on social media at all. And there's a couple of prosaic things, like I need to get a password manager. I absolutely hate passwords.
Too.
Everyone hates passwords. Apparently, getting a good password manager can just make your life so much easier. It's just one of those things I've never quite found the time to do, but 2018 is the year.
Yeah, I'll make that pledge here. I'm already regretting that. I don't know. Do you use a password manager, Kate? Or
no, but literally in the last couple of days, I've been thinking I really should.
I know. Well, especially it's like I did take some screen break time over the holiday season, so I came back and I'd forgotten all my passwords. So if there's ever a time of year that you need a password manager, it's when you've been offline for a bit of a time. Michaela Cotterill, by the way, one of our listeners, says Happy New Year to you all. Thanks for some great podcasts. Thank you. And Michaela says I'm looking forward to in the new year. What I'm looking forward to will be my annual external hard drive backups. Just about all I can do with a hangover, says Michaela. I think she actually posted that on New Year's Day. Hungover, doing her backups. Maybe not a particularly good idea. I don't know, really. And Oisin, finally, what New Year's resolution for people who send you music, because you've tweeted about this, and I think there are New Year's resolutions you would like them to keep. Things, because you get sent files, people send you them as email attachments, or they embed them in emails and so on. If somebody's listening to this and they want to be on one of your Mixclouds, how should they send you music, or how shouldn't they?
Oh, well, it's all on my website. There's actually a page which I lifted wholesale from somebody else. It's slightly tongue-in-cheek, but it's called How to Send Me Music, and it talks about the importance of not sending big email attachments, sending a link to a Dropbox or a download, or sending a link to a kind of private link on SoundCloud with a download link. And I also compile playlists every month for Phoenix magazine in London. It's a very cool fashion magazine, and that's all on Spotify. So if anybody's interested in being on that playlist, it must be on Spotify. In order to be considered, but I'd love to hear from you.
Okay.
So no more cassette tapes then?
I bet he'd quite like a cassette, but we need to know your postal address. So, okay. Well, there we will leave it. So, Oisin Lunny, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and also to you, Masa Ali Madani. And finally, congratulations to Charlie, Joanna, Kuldeep, Justice, Luke, Brian, and Mel Long, who have, over the holiday season, passed our Digital Planet listeners' entrance exam.
Bravo.
And they passed with flying colours. So well done. What a great start to the year for them. Brilliant. And to you as well, Kate. That's brilliant. Hopefully Neil Carmichael enjoyed it this time round as much as last time. There you go. Thanks, folks. And we'll be back with more technology for you next week. See you then. Bye-bye.